Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
And more spirit takes over coming past the wire. It will be more spirit to win the Los Alamitos Futurity by a length and a half.
This is just an unbelievable day for Bob Baffert and Mike Smith. They are unstoppable. More Spirit has dominated the Met Mile. He won it by 7 lengths.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Past the Wire TV. We are back with my good friend Ray DeStefano. More racetrack tales, and we were actually going to move along and go on to the next subject, but Ray decided and heard from people that he interacts with that they wanted more Pancho, didn't they, Ray? And there's a lot more about Pancho to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could go on forever with Pancho. Hold on, I'm just trying to do something with this screen. I'm just not technologically adept, but I think you can see me okay?
I can see you fine, and we got rid of, oh no, we still have Ashley's name up there, not yours, but that's okay. That's Ray, not Ashley. So everybody, I think they can tell that, so don't worry about it.
Okay. You know, first thing I wanted to say, last week, I got a lot of death threats from Chuck Sturzenegger and Buddy Hassel. I'm kind of kidding, but they are huge Frank Martin Sham fans, and Chuck has his own a big page. A lot of people. It's Sham, Sigmund Soma Stables, Frank Pancho Martin, and he just dedicates a lot of time to Sham and Somer and Martin.
He does, and he's got a great page. He's a really nice guy, and he shared something interesting with me. You know, on Sham, he was texting back and forth not too long ago with Lafitte Pincay, who told him that Sham got hurt in that race and pulled up hurt. And you know, Lafitte thought that was contributory to how Sham ran and why he stopped in the Belmont the way he did.
Well, you know, I think they misunderstood me. I said, and a lot of people say, you know, Sham lost to Belmont because of a broken heart. I never said that.
I thought that, but I didn't know. I was a little kid. I was there and a little kid, but I didn't know. Just seemed that way.
He fractured his right cannon bone, and Pincay kind of eased up on him. He knew something was wrong. What I said was Sham broke Frank Martin's heart. I think, you know,
right.
He knew he was a really good horse, and the Derby Trail against Secretariat broke his heart, not Sham's heart. Sham broke his cannon bone. So, Buddy and Chuck, I'm not correcting myself. I just think that people misunderstood what I said. I know he got hurt in the Belmont. So, my apologies. Please call off the hitmen. I want to be able to go out again. But that's Sham, Sigmund Soma Stables, Frank Pancho Martin. It's a Facebook group with a lot of good stories and pictures, and every day there's something new. So if you want to check that out. The other thing I wanted to say that we never mentioned was Pancho set a record, which is incredible. I think it's like Joe DiMaggio's 56 game hitting streak. Pancho was the leading trainer in New York for 10 straight years, 1973 to 1982. I think he was second in 1983, and he might have been leading trainer again in 1984. So if that's the case, it was 11 out of 12 years. You know, people just don't realize that, you know, the statistics were just and his accomplishments were just incredible. The other thing is that really bothers me, and I'm sure Pancho's fans, is that there's never really been a race named after him. There's the Bobby Frankel in California, grade 3, and the Lazaro Barrera in California, grade 3, and Charlie Whittingham in California, grade 2, I believe. And in New York, there's the Woody Stevens, which is now a grade 1, and there's
Alan
Jerkins, which is now a grade 1, and there's even a PG Johnson, with
Right.
all respect, which is a listed race. But why no Frank Martin? And I think Pancho died in 2012, and in July, in October of that year, they had a Frank Martin overnight stake, $80,000 purse. A tribute, yes, but gonna, with all due respect to PG Johnson, if you're gonna have a PG Johnson, you can have a Frank Martin. And there's never been, a yearly stakes race.
Why do you think that is?
Have no idea. And it's a good question. I don't know. I guess.
I mean, in today's racing environment, they would really love a guy like Pancho because they're constantly trying to fill races. And Frank, one thing about Pancho, he ran horses every day. I mean, he was in the program every day.
Yeah. Yes. And why, with his accomplishments and his stakes horses and the larger than life persona. One race, the year he died, a couple of months later, overnight race, it was like, okay, here's your tribute. But anyway, after the show last week, I got texts from Dr. Belden, who was Pancho's main vet during those years, and actually during the golden years of racing, was the main vet for many of the better horses racing during that time. He was a firm's full-time vet, and the list is just too big to go on. And he did much of Pancho's work. And I'm going to read this. He sent me about last week's show. He said, "Well done. You managed to portray our friend as the broad spectrum Renaissance man that he truly was. Traveling him was as rewarding as working with him daily." And he gave me a story which shows Pancho's confidence as a horseman and his sense of humor, which I always said he had a great sense of humor. And Jim said, Dr. Belden, "To use names would be unfair. You will probably remember the horse, Raymond. Pancho and I looked at a prominent horse for sale in another trainer's barn, watched him train, and did a good examination. The horse had some obvious minor problems, but Frank was certain that he could manage the horse and really liked him. I took a series of x-rays and went to Pancho's office to discuss them. I advised that the radiographs indicated that the evident issues were more serious than they appeared. He asked which pitches I didn't like, and I picked the two and handed them to him. Pancho pulled out his industrial strength cigar lighter and burned those films. He said, we both like the horse, and now the pictures are okay. The horse went to a successful career in his stable. I remember the horse, won't mention any names, and he did do well. And that was Pancho's confidence. The two pictures that showed Dr. Belden some issues, Pancho burnt them, and he said, now we both like the pictures. They're both okay. But you could have Dr. Belden on. He could probably tell you more story than I could. And then I got...
The only thing I want to know is who's the horse, and you guys ain't telling that, so.
Out of respect to Dr. Belden.
No, you can't do it. I get it. But, no names. I understand.
No names. When I can, I can. When I can't, I can't.
I understand.
I got a message Lori Connolly about last week's show and the shows. Oh, Ray, these are great. Pancho was one of my favorite people. He was so intimidated some mornings, intimidating. I would wait outside the clock stand when I first started training. Over the years, we had developed a solid friendship, and he was one of my first stops to visit when I came back to Belmont. He was the kindest man and an incredible horseman. Thanks for sharing your stories. They bring back wonderful memories. Now I will share one of Lori's stories. Lori came on the racetrack in the early 70s as an assistant for Dominic Imperio. At that time, I think it was just Sally Bailey, who trained Wynn and was a fairly successful trainer, nice woman, and another nice woman, Mary Carter, who worked with her husband, John Carter. And you never saw a woman on the racetrack. And Lori was a young woman in her early 20s. And she worked for Dominic, and then Dominic convinced her to go for her trainer's license, which was unheard of for a young woman like that in, I think, 1975. And she broke out on her own in 75 and had a pretty successful career here in New York until maybe the mid 80s, and then went to the Mid-Atlantic, where she trained for Bob Levy, the owner of Atlantic City. And there's another little funny story, which we won't get into, how her involvement in the breeding of Housebuster, you know, how she had an impact in that decision. But Lori said that she would go to the clocker stand in the morning, and Pancho, as I said, would always hold court. And she would stay outside the clocker stand because she was so intimidated, and all the men were in there. And Lou Mondello was the only one who he was way, you know, out of his league, but he challenged Pancho just to be the antagonist in the group, you know, just, and he had a cigar bigger than Pancho's, but Lori would stay outside, you know, and she could hear, but she was just too intimidated to go in. And one day she had to go run upstairs to the clocker stand. So she came in, went up to the clocker stand, which was on the second floor, to tell them whatever she had to tell them. And when she came down, Pancho gestured to her, "Come over here." And she, oh my God, you know, she had no idea. And obviously she was intimidated. And he said with his deep accent, politely, "What's the name of that perfume you're wearing?" And she said she wanted to just crawl in a hole. So she said whatever the perfume was. And he said, I like that. I like that. I want to get that for my wife. And he said, Lalo, his assistant, his trusty assistant, get a pen and paper, write that down. So she gave Lalo the name of the perfume, and I'm sure by 6 o'clock that night, Charlene had a bottle of whatever it was. And that was Lori's introduction to Pancho. Then she said, a year or two later, she was getting on a plane to go to a sale in Kentucky, and she was seat 2B. And she gets on the plane, and lo and behold, 2A is Frank Martin, who never really traveled alone. Never. He always had an entourage. He always liked to have at least one person with him. But he was sitting there, and she was just mortified. So she sat down, and she said it was the most enjoyable 2 hours. You know, they didn't talk horses. They just talked about life, about family. He showed a completely different side, certainly different than she imagined him to be, that loud, rough, vulgar man. And here he is just talking about his family, her family, and life in general. And I, you know, and I understood that because I knew Pancho from the track, and I knew how he was, you know, and everybody knew how he was. He could be very tough. But when he came over my parents' house for dinner, or when he had us out for dinner with Charlene, you know, we wouldn't talk horses, you know, but he would just talk about life, about him coming from Cuba, my mother coming from Italy, and just wonderful stories that showed a completely different side of the man. And I always appreciated. So I was very much aware of what Lori was saying, but she was taken aback. And she said, to this day, you know, when she comes to New York, well, now not anymore, but she did not to this day. I'm sorry, Pancho's gone, but to the days that Pancho was still at the track, she used to stop. That was one of her first stops. And, you know, Gary Contessa even said, I got all kinds of texts and emails about the movie, how it made him angry. He said, what a great guy. I have so many fond memories of him. He had a temper and was a wild and crazy guy, but he had a heart of gold. And then he tells the story, every Thanksgiving, he'd give out 300 frozen turkeys on the backstretch. And at Christmas, everybody got a present, which is what I mentioned to you before. Then he mentions the movie and how hurt Pancho was. But he told me something which I never thought of, but now that I think of it, it's so true. I used to sit in Pancho's office when we were finished work, or when I was working on the gate after schooling. I would come and sit in his office. He always liked to visit. And sometimes he would just call me when I was home, tell me to come in. I'd say, you know, about what? And he said, no, come. And then when I get there, it was really nothing. He just wanted company. And Gary Contessa described it as, it was like Marlon Brando in The Godfather, the day of his daughter's wedding. There were people coming in and out, asking for favors, you know, bringing him boxes of cigars, pastry from the Bronx, you know, Italian bread from Brooklyn, you know, like their homage to the man. And he told me, I don't know, so we go and ask. At the time, the second leading trainer in New York came to Pancho. I wasn't there, Gary was there, and told Pancho that he couldn't make his payroll. And right then and there, Pancho, without question, wrote a check. And, you know, I guess he got paid back, but he, you know, didn't bat an eyelash. He would do anything for anybody if he liked you. If he didn't like you, is a story about me personally that I always remember. I was on the gate, and after the gate, I'd go visit. This time he wasn't in his office. He was still training. He was up at the rail. And my older brother, I think he might have met him a time or two, but didn't really know him. He was buying a piece of property in Telluride, Colorado, where he built a house and he lives now. And he had borrowed money from me, my parents, and he was still significant amount of money short. To be honest, I think it was about $15,000. So I had the relationship with Pancho where I said, I'm going to ask him. And I asked him, and immediately he said, okay, I'll give you a check tomorrow. And I said, but I'm going to give you my brother's name, phone number, address, rank, name, serial number, you name it, directions to his house. In case something happens to me, you'll get your money back. And he said, I'll never forget this. My boy, that's what he used to call me, my boy. If something ever happened to you, I'm going to be so upset. I don't care about the money. Don't worry about it. And I said, well, I am. So I did bring him the information. He did lend my brother the money. He did get paid back. It was a big help to my brother. But what he was saying was, if I died, he wouldn't care about the money. You know, he would care about that I died. But I didn't die. My brother got the property, got his money back, Pancho, and everybody was happy. But he meant it. He really did mean it. And I just used, I think all the time, my boy, my boy, my boy. I had a great relationship. So obviously, I asked the man to borrow $15,000, not even for myself.
And 15,000 back then was a lot more than it is today.
I was still in the early 80s. You know, Chuck.
I'm not good at figuring that out, but 15,000 in the 80s was more than 15,000 today.
Of course.
Today you could spend 15,000 on dinner in some places if you.
I don't know if my brother would have been able to buy it because he had run out of people to borrow from. But Chuck is in touch with Ron Turcotte, like he is with Lafitte, and Turcotte had a few good stories. One was when Turcotte was in the accident. I guess after a while he was in rehab, and when he was well enough to go out for an hour or two, Pancho would pick him up and take him to dinner. Pick him up and take him to dinner. Nobody knows that. And I'm sure that meant a lot to Turcotte. And I remember Turcotte saying, how often Pancho would just give him a box of Cuban cigars, which were like gold then, and never accept a dime. And this is something that I want to read. If I can find it. Yeah, this was a text from Ron Turcotte to Chuck, but it's him. I mean, when Chuck sends me something that Turcotte or Pinkai say, I appreciate it, but he's not telling me anything that I didn't know. And Turcotte said, Frank Martin was one of the best horsemen ever, and to me, he was the greatest. I loved him. He was definitely the most generous trainer I've ever ridden for, and I'll jump in here. He was the most generous person I think I ever met, I've ever ridden for. With Frank, whenever I rode out of town, I was always treated like a king, and it never cost the jockey a penny, and we were really pampered, picked up from the airport by limousine, taken out for dinner after the races, then taken to the airport for your flight home. Yes, the man treated everybody very well, and his horses always came first. He sounded and looked tough, but inside he was a lamb. Just don't step on his toes because he could be tough. Everything there is so true. Generous, loyal, humble, sense of humor.
And the interesting thing, the interesting footnote to that is that's coming from Ron Turcotte, the rider of Secretariat, who was a rival with Sham and beat his star horse in all three of the Triple Crown races. And like you said, broke his heart, and he still treated him first class. That says a little something too. And
well, Turcotte went out to California and he won, I forget what race, on Prince Dantan for Pancho. Actually, Pinkai was on Prince Dantan and opted for another horse. I don't know if it was Linda's Chief. I don't remember. But Turcotte rode Prince Dantan and won. And Pinkai told Chuck in one of their texts, that Turcotte won on his horse. But I know for a fact about the boxes of Cuban cigars, and I didn't know about picking him up at rehab and taking him out to dinner just to get him out. Pancho was also a very humble guy, believe it or not, with all the, Larry Kelly told me a story, and Larry Kelly used to go to the shack and listen. I always said, I wish I had a camera and I wish I had videotaped his mornings in the shack. He was always the center of attention, and the stories were funny, were serious. I wish I had taped them. It would have made a great weekly series. And I wish I had written some of the things down. But Larry, whose father is in the Hall of Fame, who was a good trainer himself, Larry, used to go and listen to Pancho and wait until everybody left and just talk to Pancho one-on-one about horses, about life, about everything. And he said, I learned, except from my father, more from Frank Martin than anyone on the racetrack. You know, Frank Martin loved to talk, to help, to mentor, to whatever, if he liked you. And he told me a story once that I didn't know about. This is about humility. Charlene had gone to a local jewelry store in Garden City and ordered, I guess, to surprise Pancho, a really fancy gold bracelet with a diamond horseshoe. And now this is from Larry. This is not from Charlene. And when she brought it to Pancho, it was just too much for him. He just wasn't allowed. He dressed so neatly, so conservatively, you know, clean, but nothing fancy, nothing flashy. Just had nice jackets, nice pressed pants and shirts. But that was like, for him, overboard. So Larry, being a young trainer with a few bucks in his pocket, he ended up buying it. And he told me it ended up getting stolen off of his barn desk, which is not surprising. You know, but Pancho was not flashy. You know, he had an ego. We all have egos, but you know, he had a lot of humility. And I think I'm going to end. The time goes so fast. We're going to try to keep this to a half hour. Loyalty. If he liked you, he couldn't do enough. If you did X, he had to repay you with 10X, whether it be money, whether it be with favors, whether it would be with anything. And Ralph Thoreau, who was a jockey's agent and an alternate steward and patrol judge for NYRA.
I know Ralph a long time too, yes.
He told me how his father met him in the 50s. His father didn't know him, but they left Hialeah. He left Hialeah, drove down the road, and there was an accident. And Pancho was in the accident with two other guys. And Ralph Sr., he stopped and assisted, whatever he did. I don't know, whatever he did. And Pancho never forgot that. And jockey agents, for the most part, were petrified of Pancho because they were lined up every morning to get into his office. I was embarrassed for some of them because Pancho won races and they had jockeys. And for the most part, they annoyed him. Lenny Goodman was, you know, fine, and Fats Weissman, and you know, some of those guys. But Ralph Thoreau, I don't know if it wasn't for that, but Ralph Thoreau had Eddie Belmonte for years, and then he had other riders, and he loved Ralph. And Ralph was always one of the few jockey agents that were welcome into the office, into the barn.
And he rode Eddie Belmonte on a lot of horses. See, and Eddie won a lot of stakes for Pancho, a lot
of races, period. Yeah. And then Ralph's son, Ralph Jr., who was telling me this story, he became a jockey agent, and he had Kruger, and he had Samin.
Samin for a long time, I remember.
But he said, I don't know if I would have gotten into the barn except for my father. I might have been one of those guys that were petrified of him, but he always put me on winners, no matter what jockey I had. So going back to the 50s, Ralph's father did something for Pancho. Pancho never forgot it, embraced Ralph Sr., rode him, you know, a lot. And then his son came around, and his son had a free pass into the barn, you know, because of what the father did. Personally, and Ralph Jr. is a really nice guy, but he might have been online with all the other guys begging for an audience with Marlon Pancho Brando to get a mount. He was tough on jockey agents because he was just constantly deluged. But Ralph Thoreau Sr. could come in the barn, Ralph Thoreau Jr. So he was loyal, he was humble, he was a great horseman, he had a great sense of humor, he was larger than life. And again, we could go on next week and next week, but last week was mostly my stories. This week were a few stories about other people, but I could reach out all day long, and you know, we could just go on and on and on. So Pancho, and I never called him Pancho. I was always Mr. Martin, always Mr. Martin. And I was always my boy. So this is to you, and I hope it gave some people a little bit of insight into him as not just a trainer, as a man, as his personality.
Sounds good.
Any
Mike?
questions?
No, I think it's great stuff. I mean, I think you guys had a great friendship and a great relationship, more like family.
Because that was the first barn I came to when I jumped the fence and
Right.
saw the imposing guy with an ag. You got a job? What do you want to do? I think it was funny. He's a little kid, and I was little. Be a hot walker. I remember that word, hot walker. Walk around, keep making left turns. All right, come back tomorrow. Go get your license. You got a job, and I never left. Literally, never really left. I was always involved with him somehow, even up until the end. Even just going to visit him in the barn, just to talk. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity, Jonathan, to if we could only do 2 shows, these were the 2 that I would want to do. Not the gate, not how I started, and the 1962 Belmont, but these stories, and maybe next week we'll jump in about his relationship with Bobby Franco, and then move on to something else. But anyway, thank you again, Jonathan.
Thank you, and we'll do it again next week. And a lot of interesting stories to come. I'm anxious for you to tell the one about Jerry Grote in Japan. I think that's going to get a chuckle out of some people. I like that one, and it's just so many great ones. And
Well,
looking forward to it, my friend.
Okay, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, and you and I will talk this week about what we'll talk about next week, and the list is endless. So I'm sure we'll come up with something good.
Sounds like a plan. Ciao for now.
Thanks.
Nobody does it better.